All right. Forgot about the time.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a beautiful brand new day. It's a Wednesday, and here in the Enchanted Forest, it is spectacular in Michigan. And I'm so excited about today's show. Wherever you happen to be listening around the world, come on in. The chat room is open. We enjoy having everyone in the chat room. And I think this morning is going to be a particularly fun half hour with a dear good friend of mine, Margaret. We know her as Meg Annutto. Good morning, Meg.
Good morning, Steve. Thanks for having me this morning. So exciting to talk with you and spend some time with you about some of our favorite subjects.
I know. Meg and I have known each other for several years, and one of the things that we share is growing up Catholic. And I think that we also share a really healthy sense of humor about what that means. So sometimes we can be reverent and sometimes very irreverent, and yet reverent at the same time about things of a spiritual or a religious matter. And so that we have great, good fun together, laughing and giggling, and at the same time having good, serious conversation. Meg is the owner of Discovering Infinite Grace. She also has her own podcast show. Would you talk about that for a moment, Meg?
Yeah, that's just a Facebook live. We usually do it once a month. It's not on a regular day because Poppins is a nanny, so her schedule changes sometimes in the evening, sometimes certain days. And it's just basically we just draw cards for each person that joins us, and we come and we give you practical advice with the spiritual messages that come through for you. And we really try to have people make practical changes in their life, understanding that it's spiritual guidance that's coming through. Yeah.
And the name of that show is Poppins and Meg.
Poppins
Everybody,
and Meg.
check it out. And check out on Facebook as well, Discovering Infinite Grace with Meg. Really great, wonderful work that she does. And this morning we're going to talk about the saints. You know, I've been pondering for a while this idea of talking about the saints, not necessarily as Meg and I learned about them in our 1,000 years of going to catechism every Wednesday in our youth, but how they actually pertain to modern day life. You went to catechism, didn't you, Meg?
Oh, yes. Yep, with the nuns. Yep.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Yeah. And so here we are, all of these years later, and now we can appreciate what it was that they were trying to teach us when we were younger. And I think we've grown into a deeper understanding, particularly when it comes to angels and saints, which was part of the curriculum. It's what you learn when you go to catechism. Good morning, Angie. Hey, Danielle. And so now, well, first, let me ask you a question, Meg. Who's your favorite saint or saints, and why?
You got all day? Okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, first one is the Blessed Mother.
Mm-hmm.
And for her, that was just as a child, just always that feeling, communion, all of that, having her statue. Just that was my probably first saint that I wasn't fearful of or afraid of her story or anything like that. And the beautiful thing is when I started to explore, spirituality, obviously differently than religion, I started to learn how to meditate. Now, I always used to do the rosary. That was something that we grew up as children. But in this manner, when I started to meditate, the rosary Mary's life came to life once I took the story of each of them. And I think I was on the first mystery where she's going through the woods to, um, her cousin, and to tell her that, she's with child after Gabriel had visited her. And it was such a real, very mystical experience for me. Um, and I could feel, her heartbeat became my heartbeat, and I could feel her going into the woods, and all the different thoughts that were going through her head, and the age that she was. And so it was a very mystical way to do the rosary that I've never experienced before. So I was very grateful for that. And I went through, all the mysteries, and as well as the luminous mysteries, and that brought a lot of healing to me right before my mom passed away, because I had a very not difficult, um, just a very confusing type relationship with my mom. And um, doing that experience healed this mother-daughter relationship, because Mary became my mother, and her stories became part of me. You know what I mean? Um, so it was a very fantastic experience for me.
Sounds like a very mystical experience.
Yes, it was, and I wouldn't have known, what that was at the time. It was just. I mean, I started to realize what it was for me, but yeah, and I like St. Anne's, her mom, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and so in CYO, we used to go and visit different places in Canada. So we would, if we were able to go on, it was like April vacation. We would go somewhere in Canada, because I lived in upstate New York, and that was the, most convenient place for us to visit. And we would go to all the different spiritual sites. And St. Anne's Basilica was one when I went in Quebec, and I was in 12th grade. But I went from 9th to 12th, and the priest would always go with us. We had a really nice Irish priest who was pretty well hip for those days and times. So he was fun, and he wasn't scary, Father Healy. He ended up actually marrying my husband and I. But we went to St. Anne's Basilica, and there in Quebec, when we talk about intercessing for prayers, and we use them because we know their closeness and the relationship that they built in their lifetime with God. That they were devoted to that, and that's why we use them as intercessors, because they've made that pathway of light so much easier for us to connect with and be with. And so it's not that we're praying to Anne. I'm going to Anne, who knows so much about Christ and God and faith and all of those things. But the basilica that they have there, there's like the archways and everything are lined with the crutches. So a lot of miracles came, and people would go up on their knees on these stairs. But one morning we had mass in this small little cove, and it was a small little room, and it was not in the big church, but it was in a place where the priest at the time said that it was known that if you used your private intention during this mass, that it would be interceded. So it was right before I had really started dating my husband. He was in CYO, and he was going. So my prayer was, I want to marry this guy. I really like him. I really, and 2 weeks after we returned home, he asked me out for a date. So I laughed, because I really did, I had known him and really wanted him to recognize me or have some type of relationship with him. So he always says that I put the whammy on him there, though. And that,
the Catholic whammy, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Well, if it wasn't for that whammy you put on me, but it was a very sacred time, and it was very deep from my heart, and my soul felt that. And 35 years later, it's it was a great intercession prayer, and so I think about that, and lots of times we don't know anything. We didn't really know much about Anne. We didn't know much about Mary's father, like Joachim or Joachim, I don't know even how you say it, and how much even Anne let her child go, just as Mary did,
Right.
let Jesus, to be raised by the pious, what they called the pious women. And so she spent, I think 8 years,
Hmm.
and I'm sure it was probably to keep her safe and her gifts, her gifts. Just like when they say, Jesus disappeared, for 12 years or whatever and wandered around. I don't know if that's 100% true. I kind of feel from the things that I've read or researched that, Mary moved him a lot because of
Hmm.
his gifts and knew
Hmm.
that that was a way to keep him safe.
Hmm.
So sometimes, when we read the stories, obviously they're skewed by the saints, but, excuse me, by the Roman Catholic dogma and people's stories. But
Right.
so Anne was another one that I really like. And I guess you can read about them in the Gospel of James. And I don't even think we ever even talked about the Gospel of James when we were in church.
No, no, we
Um,
didn't typically go into those sorts of things. The photo that I used for our promo today, I took, or actually Todd took, when we were in the cave of Mary Magdalene in Saint
oh,
Baume, France. And that's the reliquary of her bones in the cave
okay.
that we hiked up to. Mary Magdalene has always been one of my very favorite saints. And even as a child, I knew the story that I was being fed was not the real story. And I found it interesting what in 2008 there was an edict handed down out of the Vatican, at least at the church that, I was attending and my kids were going to school at here in West Michigan, that there were going to be classes based on the truth of who she was. So that the lies that had been told, as you say, by those giving the stories or writing the stories, rewriting the stories, there was a rewrite that happened in 2008. And I was so happy to see that the reality of who she was beginning to emerge. And I feel as though it's still beginning to emerge. And like you, of course, the Holy Mother, but I also enjoy Saint Teresa of Avila,
Mm-hmm.
another of the mystical saints,
Mm-hmm.
and of course the author of the many mansions or the interior mansions. It goes by many names: the interior castle, the many mansions of the soul. It's still a bestseller. It's still in this modern day a bestseller, which I think is interesting. And so it's not that they're relegated, they meaning the saints, even the modern day ones like Padre Pio, Mother Teresa, they're not relegated to being in a convent or in a cathedral, but they are intercessors. They are spirit guides, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Explanation, yeah.
For those that are listening, because you're thinking, I want to know about whatever this, the saints are. Who are they really?
Yeah.
I believe that there's a saint for every medical condition, every occupation. There are volumes written about the saints. For myself, I really like the mystical saints like Francis of Assisi, Saint Clare of Assisi, Bernard of Clairvaux. I really enjoy reading those. Of course, Padre Pio, who was known not only to bear the stigmata, but to teleport to various places. He was also known to be able to levitate. And
Yeah.
people wonder oftentimes, how does somebody become a saint? Okay, so they were a really holy person and they passed away. How does somebody become a saint? How do you answer that, Meg?
Well, for the church part of it, there was, certain things that had to be done. Most of them were not canonized as a saint when they were living or anything like that. It's usually after they passed away. And I believe that was partly because when they're gone and there's some space between that, and then they claim this person, the church claims this person as this, but how they have ownership over the saints. Um, but that they have to have some miracles
Mm-hmm.
being done.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just, I don't know too much more about the canonization. I know that the Pope decides it, and there's a council and stuff. Um, and then, they look at their, different things that they've done, their writings perhaps, because St. Teresa of Avila, she, had books and books and books of
Mm-hmm.
her journey,
Mm-hmm.
and so they called her the doctor of the church because she really took care of the soul. Like she
Yes.
really taught us what the soul is about and what the human condition is and what the game plan is here while we're here, if you really look into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know much more than that. You might know more than you can add to let people know. But I think it's somewhat political, but then somewhat, people that did get canonized were also did really good things for the church. I mean, good
Absolutely.
for not even for the church, but for the people,
Right.
whoever they were, whether they were Jesuits, whether they were Carmelites. Teresa was a Carmelite, and she, they had their own purpose, just like a politician or what do you call them, a philanthropist, a missionary. They had this purpose, and they saw that purpose. So not only did they live out their purpose, but they all, that extraordinarily changed things for
Mm-hmm.
people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps set an example, because some of the saints, some things were really rough.
Mm-hmm.
And for like Teresa, like Carolyn Mace, who I've been studying with, she mentioned that Teresa didn't like wall herself off from the world, but it was a safe place for her to go because while she was going through that, they didn't. It was almost like with Jesus going through his mystical teachings and things for protection for them, so that they could do their work and develop
Mm-hmm.
their skills and their spiritual, channels.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that one of the requirements to becoming a saint is that there has to be, miracles that are attributed to the human being or even to an angel. A lot of times I will be asked, so why is Michael, Uriel, Raphael, Gavriel, why are they saints and some of the others are not? And just like the human holy people that pass on and are bestowed, they're canonized and beatified. It's because there are miracles that are attributed to asking for their assistance. When Meg uses the word intercession, for those of you that didn't go to catechism or attend Mass growing up, intercession simply means asking for help, asking for assistance. From the divine realms, from the heavenly realms, call it what you will. And so many of the saints who have been asked, to assist from their place in the heavens, miracles have occurred for those who have asked and recorded. But not only do they have to be recorded, they have to be proven. And so there has to be some proof in the pudding, and of course, everything tends to get political at times. I agree with you, Meg. But miracles that are proven to have happened. So when we petition someone, a saint from the other side, and I think that this goes for saints from every tradition, it's not just Catholic people who have saints, but we assume that they are ascended beings, or we feel as though they are ascended beings who are in a state or a plane with Creator where they are able to help us here on earth. And when we look at the lives of the saints, we see really that they were people who oftentimes overcame extraordinary circumstances or dedicated themselves to the betterment of community or others. I always think of Mother Teresa. And sometimes I believe that they were living miracles or angels on earth, even while they were here having their experiences, some very mystical. And that word mystical can be a real turnoff to people who don't understand the word mystical. Why are so many of the saints, when we dig into them, do you believe, Meg, mystics?
Well, I think it kind of goes hand in hand. To be mystic, I kind of feel like so in the church, a lot of the mystical components of connecting with divine was sort of, a chain of, you have to go to the priest for your reconciliation and all those kinds of things. So I think for me, when I was growing up, um, I thought that to ever even have a mystical experience like the saints, that was just not going to happen. I was too ordinary,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe that the mystic piece of them, they were mystics because they went beyond the walls of the confinement or limits of the order of the church, the walls of the church, the dogma pieces that kept them in their place, and they were able to go to mystical places beyond their belief system, beyond the human condition, and they knew a different way. So although they were faithful to the church, they, a lot of them, stayed within the confines of the church and the boundaries of the church, but they also had a piece of them that was almost like that little rebel as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
And they did bring those messages of silent rebellion, kind of giving us that message that, this is a beautiful place to be. However, it is that built of humans, and you need to just expand your mind. I did it, even if you look at St. Ignatius, and, he was a general. He was in the, army, and, his leg got blown off with like a cannonball. That's what I mean. Like, you read all these things and you're like, well, I want to be a saint. Because if that's my journey, I don't want to have
it's
any of those kinds of things, I don't want to be Joan of Arc, and I don't want to be any of that, and I guess I'm not even going to think about it, because if God thinks that I'm thinking about it, I don't want him to think I'm interested in it, and then that's the way my life is going to unwind. It's how you think of it as a teacher, or as a child, right, when they're telling you all this stuff.
Exactly. Please
like,
don't let that be me. I'll just be a nun. Did you want to be a nun when you were a little girl? Because I did.
I did. I loved hanging out in the church. I'm not certain why, because there were components that were scary. But for some reason, when it was just you in the church in prayer, it was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that peace. And I think, at that point, we were probably meditating, but no one ever told us what it was, or, it was just mostly like imagination. But you'd zone off, and I loved going to the church. It was peaceful for me.
Mm-hmm.
To just hang out. And
Kelly Spencer is enjoying our sense of humor in the chat room.
That's good.
Yeah. Kelly Spencer. Oh my goodness. I remember when we were 12 or 13 years old is when the movie The Exorcist came out.
Oh.
And of course, Kelly, they were, Norwegian Lutherans. They weren't Catholic. So only, when you're younger, you think, oh my goodness. And the way the movies portrayed it, only Catholic people got possessed, right? So I went to see that movie with her and her mother, and she was safe because she was Lutheran, right? And so I think it scarred me for life, that movie. I'm pretty sure that it did.
Yeah. But if I even think about, it's like the law of attraction that we didn't even know. It was the law of, oh my God, don't think about it, it's going to come my way. And we kind of knew, like, we were like, not even knowing what that really meant, but, hey, yeah.
It was scary.
We learned later what that all was all about, right?
Exactly. One of the things I find fascinating about the saints and some of the mystical side of the church that a lot of, Catholics really don't even recognize or have never been taught about the mystical traditions or the mystical side of things. Another of my favorite saints is Hildegard of Bingen, who understood the power of octave and sound to part the veils. And so she was allowed to chant for the Pope. She was a seer for the Pope, and quite a prolific songwriter. And it was the year 2000 that the music of Hildegard von Bingen was finally published on CD. I still have it with me. I have it, in my music cache in iTunes, and I listen to it because there's something about the tone and the frequency that parts the veils. And she was a very gifted seer and sensitive. And those are layers of the church that aren't often talked about for a variety of reasons. And here we are talking about it. And Julian of Norwich, the same thing. And for, a lot of people will say, well, that's a Catholic thing. But that's not necessarily true. Let's take one of the things a lot of people know about, for instance, St. Anthony of Padua. So you lose your keys, you lose something. We call on St. Anth, right? Because he is going to help us find. He's the saint of finding lost things. And that's also metaphorical. But what about St. Joseph and burying him upside down in the yard when you're trying to sell the house, right?
Mm-hmm.
It works.
Been there, done that. And the only thing I would add is like in that little printout that they put in there with the little plastic Joseph.
Uh-huh.
And I always had a hard time putting them in the dirt, so I'd always put them in a baggie because I kind of felt, a little bit disrespectful. Then it says put them upside down, and I'm like, okay, but that's like to me, this is like before I really, I was extremely indoctrinated Catholic. So this was in my late 20s when we sold our first house. And I'm like, well, is this a trick? Because I'm pointing them down and I'm thinking all these disrespectful things and whatever. And, but it worked. But yeah, I still had this amount of fear. And then I remember that the first one, I never went to go dig it back up and take it with you, because you're supposed to take it with you and then put it in your new house.
Mm-hmm.
Is a thing of honor.
Mm-hmm.
Because then it said you would be, more like a vagrant if you didn't, do that type thing, right? Who knows? But
you hear that, Kelly Spencer?
Yeah.
Did you hear what she just said? Absolutely. So St. Christopher, the saint of travelers, and that's another one that people tend to be very familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And
from every religion.
And from every religion.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Everybody,
yeah.
Their grandmothers will give their kids, their grandkids, when they're driving, or the kids in the car.
Yeah, exactly. There have been times in my path that someone will, come to see me for a counseling session or what have you, and they'll say, well, I grew up Catholic and I'm not really certain about all of this, communicating with dead people or spirit guides or all of that. And without hesitancy, I always ask, so have you ever lost your car keys? Well, yeah, and St. Anthony helped me. And I will often say, well, he's been dead for a while. So that means that you have been communicating and asking for assistance from somebody who's long gone. I think that qualifies as spirit guide and communicating with those that have passed. And all of a sudden the light bulb goes on. Oh, well, oh my goodness, I think that you're right about that. And, sometimes people, I think as we get older, we look even at our confirmation names. What's your confirmation name, Meg?
Mary.
Okay. And so we all, when we're growing up Catholic and we're confirmed into the church, we are all asked to research and come up with a name of a saint that we would like to emulate in our lives, or that we would just like to have walk with us in our lives, because names are so important. What we name our children, what we call ourselves, so important. And, there are even occasions where women will choose a man's name. And recently, our dear friend Audra, her son asked me to be his sponsor at confirmation. And he chose the name St. John. John the Beloved, not John the Baptizer. And so I purchased for him a St. John the Beloved medallion. I guess it was 1 year ago, because it's springtime. It's getting to be confirmation time. And he wears it. And people will ask, well, why are you wearing a Mary Magdalene medallion or a Holy Mother medallion? How do you feel about why we wear those medallions, Meg?
We wear them to remind us of our faith. We don't wear them as they're not like replaced or that they're magical. It's when we connect with the essence and the spirit of them, and what we know about them and what we want to have strength in. All the saints point to Jesus. All the saints point to the teachings and the Christ consciousness. And So nothing is, no one is, it's not a bunch of idols or anything like that. It's their life, how they live their life, very similar to what we want to walk, or a purpose that we want, or an essence of them, an archetypal essence of that
Mm-hmm.
person. We want to invoke in our own self and awaken,
Mm-hmm.
awaken it, because it's all within all of us. But there are certain things that, Mary brings to us, or, like how you said, the different people or saints that you liked, or the saint that you picked for yours.
Mm-hmm.
It's that archetypal essence
Mm-hmm.
of them that we want to have them invoked in us and walk with us and guide us.
Right. It's like when I was a teenager, I wore a Fran Tarkington jersey. Right? He was my favorite Minnesota Viking. Remember,
Yes.
Kelly? And so it's not that I want to be Fran Tarkington, but there's something about him and his leadership that I identified with. So we, in this culture that we live in the West, for some people, sports is kind of their religion, and they wear their favorite, team jersey. For Dane, it was a Steve Yzerman number 19 Red Wings jersey, something that you want to emulate with leadership. And the same thing, when it comes right down to it, just exactly what you said, Meg. It's studying the saints is about studying their lives. And what we can often find is that there can be similarities in the way maybe that they've suffered or they've walked through the dark night, and
Yes.
how they became unattached to the dark night and more ensconced in their soul and their soul's purpose. It's a stripping away of the human experience, the pain of the human experience, and the level of awareness or consciousness that it brought them to, the closeness that it brought them to their own solar self.
Yeah. And what's nice, I mean, like, a lot of the Teresa's work has been, rewritten to understand it in our time,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's a lot easier to pick up somebody that took it and took it to a place of our understanding.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really important. It's like, to me, the saints coming back
Mm-hmm.
are like the ancestors of what we need in this world today.
Mm-hmm.
They understood the human condition, and what, if any of them understood, what we're going through
Mm-hmm.
now,
Mm-hmm.
and the power of them and invoking them to come forward and heal the planet and walk with us and inspire us is so important, and we can
Mm-hmm.
learn from them in a far different way than we learned in catechism.
Absolutely. Del Marie is in the chat and she's asking, from a different cultural perspective, we were not familiar with saints until we were exposed to Christianity. Do you believe or think we are included or heard by these saints in our prayers? Absolutely, positively, yes.
Oh gosh, yes, yes,
Yes.
yes. It's
Mm-hmm.
not the. It's not. They are not owned.
No, it's not about Catholicism. And I think that um, that they are people that went beyond a particular religious stream. At least for
Right.
myself, they were ensconced in, of course, Catholicism, but as mystics, their tradition would be, I think, Del, I would equate it to like Black Elk, who was very much a saint. I have a book in the house downstairs, maybe you've seen it, Del, about the mystics of the plains. And
Yeah, I think all religions have
yeah,
it, don't you think?
all religions have mystics. And mystics, by virtue of the fact that they're mystics, are not enamored with or contained within one religion. They see the oneness in all. And that, look at St. Francis of Assisi. He would not, on any given day, unless he was forced, live inside, indoors. He, for heaven's sakes, he lived in the cracks and nooks and crannies there in Italy. I visited the grotto and the place where he bore the stigmata. He felt God didn't belong in a building. And it raised a lot of ire for the people building the buildings, but he didn't believe that creation could be housed in a building. Creation is every living thing. And I love the canticle of St. Francis. And in the canticle, he expresses that wind is his brother, and water is his brother and sister, and the sun and the moon. And I think that all, like, probably can't say all, but I would say the vast majority of mystics understood that we are all connected, and not connected by a single belief, but connected by soul.
Right.
And
It's such a Essene principle,
yeah,
from the Essenes, that
hmm
principle.
yeah,
And it's kind of, you can follow the lineage
hmm
of, as these human beings
hmm
came and did these, very extraordinary experiences and left extraordinary light
hmm
here for us to follow.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, Meg, it's at the bottom of the hour, and it has been fantastic. Next up, I've got Terry Ruel, who's at the top of the hour with her brand new show, Dear Miss T. She's going to be talking today about how do we get through and maintain sanity during this time of elections and coronavirus and the time we're living in right now. It's going to be a
Great,
great show. But I want to
great
thank
program.
you, my friend, for being with me and for all of the work that you do here on Grandmother.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And if I can just end, can I end it with a little bit of a little saying from
I would love
Teresa?
that.
Okay. And thank you so much for having me. It was really fun connecting today, and being able to talk about something I love. So this is from St. Teresa of Avila, depends on how you say it. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing make you afraid. All things are passing. God alone never changes. Patient gains all things. If you have God, you will want for nothing. God alone suffices.
Beautiful. Thank you, Meg.
Have a great day. Thank you, Denise.
Have a beautiful day, everyone. Love you too. Bye-bye. Shine on, everybody.